town is what it is because of these kind of groups. They keep the history of our town going, they honor our town, and we need people to get involved. So between the Historical Society and the Legion, thank you guys for what you do for us, and everybody please get involved and continue this going forward. Thank you.
As event chairman, I am thrilled that we're in our fourth year now. We started this back in about 2020. We were in the morass of COVID, and we started talking about this event. And of course, the Harding brothers, you know, Mary hit the nail on the head. We're going on 247 years. In fact, they would have been interred there on Tuesday. It'll be 247 years. So a lot has changed, but their sacrifice hasn't. So we've generally had speakers who have, you know, talked a lot about, and they've all been fantastic. So one of the things we wanted to do this year was try and bring, you know, the text, what you read, the accounts that you have alive. There's nothing like living history. You can hear it, you can see it. So we're going to do something a little bit different that I think is going to be very, very interesting. And I think, you know, if you don't have as much of an appreciation about what happened, I think this is going to get a lot of people to want to learn more. So with that being said, I'm going to start out with our program here. We have 5 individuals. We're going to take a step back into 1778, and we're going to have, you know, a lot of people don't realize they were real life individuals just like us, and there was a lot going on, and until you hear it from their lips, you're not really, maybe you won't get what was going on at the time. So I'm going to start out with one of the probably most central figures of our Valley history at the time. I'd like to, you know, you all know that he had a fort right around where the bridge is. I like to think of him as the first West Pittstonian, but he's going to tell you that, you know, West Pittston, Pennsylvania, this was Connecticut. But at this point, I'm gonna turn the mic over to a legend, Mr. John Jenkins.
My name is John Jenkins. While many of you may know my stockade located down at the river, few of you may know how I irrevocably am tied to these tragic events for which we are gathered here today. The ambush and murder of the hard-working men who have been laid to rest yonder was a senseless tragedy. These men were a hard-working lot, true to their families and land. So too were these men patriots. Their loss was a testament to the threat we faced from an enemy that had no mercy. I understand this as well as anyone. It was in late September of '77 when myself, Amos York, and Old Fitzgerald were captured while looking at land we had just acquired from the Susquehanna Land Company, north of Tunkhannock. We pulled in ashore when a group of Indians and Tories appeared and took us prisoner. Immediately our own countrymen spared no mercy in their torture. Having watched several Tories harass Old Fitz, they forced him to the ground and demanded he swear loyalty to the crown or face the wrath of a large boulder dropped upon his head. Old Fitz chose death, and those who held him down provided laughter instead. Amos and I were moved north and imprisoned at the enemy's stronghold at Fort Niagara, where I witnessed more brutality, both Tory and Indian alike. Our cell was dark, cold, and dank. Food, if not rotten and moldy, was rare, and our clothing was an inadequate offset to the lack of blankets. While most of us withered away to our bones, there was a man by the name of Pickering who retained his portly shape, despite not having an adequate diet. The Indians would poke at his belly and arms, suggesting that Pickering would make a nice meal. It was one evening he was taken from the cell, and while we heard periodic screams, we never did see Pickering again. But the thought of what might have happened to him was terrifying. The enemy's aim was quite simple: submit or be killed. Still, I think they wanted to just kill us all at the same time, the time of their choosing. I cannot trust neither those native to this continent nor those loyal to the crown to provide quarter to any man or woman, child, who they deemed to be traitors. As we pushed out of our winter quarters at Niagara, it seemed apparent that an enemy force of Tories and Indians was being mobilized to move south. Throughout the spring of '78, I was in constant motion with my captors. Somehow, by the hand of God, I reckon, opportunity presented itself from a very unlikely source. A Seneca war chief, who I knew as Red Jacket, and who sometimes spoke to me in a broken form of English, told me that I would soon be killed. He told me that my death would be a senseless act. That evening, while bound to a post, he approached me and struck me in the face 3 to 4 times, severely. After I had managed to refocus my gaze, I noticed that he had dropped a knife into my lap under a small blanket. He then whispered for me to wait until camp was all asleep. After what seemed to be an eternity, I cut myself loose and took off into the wilderness. I ran for hours, but the thought of seeing my sweet Bethia kept me going. That, and of course, warning our people of what was about to come our way. It was well over a week or more before I finally limped back into the valley, tired, tattered, but eager. I appraised Colonel Dennison of what I had just escaped from. With so many of our best men having gone off to serve in the Continental Army under George Washington, it was important that our families be taken heed. Having been separated from Bethia, whose face lit up my thoughts throughout my terrible time in captivity, I wanted to take her hand in marriage as soon as I was able to. We immediately were married, and following our marriage, I left for Valley Forge in an effort to help persuade George Washington temporarily dispatch a force that could efficiently protect Wyoming from Grant and Butler. Though nothing was directly promised, George Washington vowed that he would try to spare whatever he could, presumably several companies, as the situation would allow. Though we felt something was afoot, all seemed quiet for a few weeks, until one evening in late June of '78, when a young boy who I knew came barreling into my home shortly after midnight with a terrifying story.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Very well done. Of course, the individual that Mr. Jenkins is referring to comes in the form of about 11 or 12-year-old boy by the name of Johnny Hatzel. When the Hardings and their work parties were ambushed, few got away. One of the unlikely outcomes was the youngest was able to hide and eventually make his way downstream. And I think back to when I was 12, and some of the things that 12-year-olds do or don't do. It's a remarkable story of how somebody that young could literally be graced under pressure. So that being said, I'm going to turn the mic over to young Johnny Hatzel.
My name is John Hatzel. Father had his field situated about 6 miles upriver from the Jenkins place. The Hardings had their field a little bit further south than ours, closer to the direction of Wyoming. Mr. Jenkins had put out the word that a lot of Indians were moving towards us and was real concerned about anyone leaving the valley. He and several of the older folks had been trying to get some of our men from General Washington's army to come back home. If there's going to be a fight, we need all of our guys. Still, even with the enemy moving in our direction, Father says we can't risk losing a good crop of corn. Our field needs quite a bit of work. So we was told that we would be headed to those fields at the first light on Tuesday the 30th. On that morning, there was a bunch of us that moved out sometime between 5 and 6 in the morning. So there was me, Father, and my sister's husbands, Ed Reynolds and Danny Carr. The Hardings, Mr. Ben, and his brother, Mr. Stuckley, and nephew Stephen. Also, there was Peter Rogers, John Gardner, Danny Wallen, and old Quacko Martin. Peter Rogers was much older than me. The Hardings, John Gardner, and Peter Rogers took their fields first. The rest of us stopped about 800 yards further upstream at our fields. We was working in 2 groups. Father Quacko and Dan Carr were working in the field on top of the bank above the western shore of the river. Me, Eb, and Danny Wallen was working on one small of islands, or about 100 yards offshore of the river. Them fields was in rough shape, and we darn near worked ourselves mad. The sun was hot, and Father said we needed to be there almost sundown. I did look forward to a number of trips to the edge of the river. Just getting some cold water and some shade did me a bunch of good. But we worked pretty hard, as we usually did. I reckon it was sometime after 8 p.m. when we heard gunfire. Eb yelled for us to grab the guns and paddle back to shore. Father and the others could be in trouble. When we got to the shore, there was about a 5-foot climb up the bank. Eb told me to stay put and watch the canoes. He and Danny ran up to the bank with their rifles. It looked like Eb and Danny were staying low as they ran forward. I heard the gunfire and Ricketts' screams. It had to be the Indians. I could hear the screams and yells. I made sure the canoes were attached to the shore. By this time, the yells and shrieks were getting louder. Scared for my life, I jumped into the river and swam through a large thicket of grass and wood that was carried downstream by the current. As I submerged myself up to my nose, an Indian came running down the bank. There was nearly 10 minutes walking, looking around. I thought I was going to die of fright right there. At one point, I was looking right at this Indian's foot as he left and climbed the bank. He yelled something in a tongue I could not understand. It was probably about an hour or more before it was dark enough that I could even think about moving. Finally, when it got dark enough, I moved out of my hiding spot and quietly got one of the canoes. I waded in the river and holding the canoe before quietly climbing and then floating close to the shoreline. I was really scared that I'd be seen and shot at. But I kept going downstream, very careful not paddle or get too far off of the shoreline. It took me about another hour or so to make the 5-mile journey back home. It was late, I reckon, when I beached my canoe and ran as fast as I could to the Jenkins place. I was still hearing the Indian yells, gunfire, and screams in my head when all of a sudden Mr. Jenkins looks at me with his rifle in hand. I told him, Mr. Jenkins, it's me, Johnny. Indians may have gotten Father and the others. Help.
That's definitely quite a tale of bravery, and young Hats will definitely put himself in that category of a legend, I think. But one of the folks that was there when young Hatzel presumably came ashore, not just Mr. Jenkins, but his better half, and as Mr. Jenkins said, it probably kept him going when he was imprisoned up in Fort Niagara. So one of the things that folks might not really understand is that if a settlement like Wyoming had been sacked and the men killed, it's very interesting to see from the female perspective, as they knew what the harsh realities would have been. So with that, we're going to turn the mic over to Bethia Jenkins, and she will talk about her experience.
My name is Bethia Jenkins. The thought of seeing those graves is almost too much to bear. My husband John was captured by the same Indians who murdered those good, upstanding men. It gives me pause to think I may have never seen my John again. He went north in November of 1777 and he didn't return. We knew he would have only been 30 miles or so upstream, but when he didn't return, we feared the worst. It was sometime in the winter of 78 when Colonel Dennison learned of John's capture from a British defector. The tension in the valley between those of us who support independence and those who wish to remain loyal to the crown is grave. It is one thing for two armies to fight formally, namely the Redcoats on one side and our Continentals on the other, but there appears to be others who think it acceptable to kidnap neighbors with whom they disagree. Those who are not wearing a soldier's uniform should not be subject to the horror of war while they are engaged in work. While I disagree with my neighbors on whether we should govern ourselves or be governed by the King of England, that disagreement should not result in kidnapping or murder. I had all but lost hope when one morning my prayers were answered. It was sometime in early morning of May when my John appeared. Barely alive, he looked as though he were nearly starved to death. His clothes tattered and torn, he collapsed in front of me. As happy as I was to see him, I was concerned that he may not survive. Almost barely able to speak, he proposed to me, at which point I happily accepted. Though we tried to keep him warm and in bed, he demanded to see Colonel Dennison. Through a faint voice, he mustered great strength to warn Colonel Dennison of an impending attack. We prayed and hoped that General Washington would hear our pleas for help and send reinforcements to protect our homes. It was not more than a few days later, with some good rest and food, that John and I were wed. I did not want him to leave my side, but the feeling in the valley was very tense. We knew that most of our able-bodied men were away and attached to General Washington's army. We were concerned that General Washington wouldn't hear our pleas and wouldn't send men. John was getting stronger with each day, but the feeling in the valley was very tense. We knew we had a good number of neighbors that resented our support of the Continentals, and we just didn't know. We didn't know if we would be safe. It was sometime June the 30th. It seemed like any other day. We knew a small group of men was going north to tend their fields, but there had been yet to see any sign of the enemy. John felt with our home on this side of the river and Fort Pittston to the east that we would see any force approaching with enough time to evacuate if necessary. It was sometime the evening of the 30th. It was a hot summer night with a pretty sunset. My John was spending most of his time watching, waiting, listening for anything out of the ordinary. It was sometime after midnight when he heard someone approaching quickly. He drew his rifle and heard, Mr. Jenkins, don't shoot." He recognized the voice to be that of young Johnny Hatzel. We both rushed to this child's side and embraced him. He was shaking with fear, yelling, "Indians, Indians, they attacked us. They may have killed them all." It took some time to calm Johnny down. We got him some food and water, and he recalled the events of the ambush that day. He said he wasn't sure, but he thought there were more Indians than the number of the two parties of men that worked in the field that day. He recalled the shrieks of the Indians and the bark of the gunfire that still terrified him. My John told me to keep Johnny calm, and with much assurances that he was safe, John and Johnny would have to report to Colonel Dennison. I have always known my John to be a calm and brave man, but that evening he had the look of fear etched on his face. I thought when my John came home, all would be fine, but now I fear we are at the mercy of something awful. If we are not reinforced with our men who fight in General Washington's army, what may become of us? If they kill our men, what will become of us women left behind? And more importantly, what about us women? And more importantly, our children? I fear we are at the mercy of something awful. I fear that neither woman nor child shall be spared the depravity of these awful people. May God help us.
Thank you, Bethia. Now this next part of the presentation is going to turn to kind of what I will call the military professionals, and I think the first military what I would call genius that we're going to hear from is somebody you probably know. His homestead still stands. It's the oldest, I believe, in the county. Colonel Nathan Dennison. Now, there's two butlers Zebulon Butler was our butler. He may take some issue with that, but I'm kind of going with Colonel Dennison myself. But he was in a precarious position where he was trained and he knew that probably something major was coming, but he wasn't sure just how much and how many. So he had some difficult calls to make, and of course, as you'll hear, he plays a pivotal role in going to get the the Harding brothers before they were interred here. So with that, Colonel Dennison.
My friends, good afternoon. I am Colonel Nathan Dennison. By early afternoon on July 1st, we knew we had to bear the difficult responsibility of retrieving our fallen brethren, Ben and Stuckley Harding. My thoughts were affixed to many things. Amongst the most pressing was the reality that two good friends had been massacred. And as far as we could tell, we're the first of a much larger group that the enemy sought to destroy. Myself and several of my officers had been in conference before dawn. John Jenkins had managed to get little Johnny Hatzel to discuss what he had seen. And following a lengthy discussion, it might have been around 6 or so in the morning when Stephen Harding and Peter Rogers entered 40 Fort with their accounts. Needless to say, while the fates of Daniel Carr, John Gardner, and Quaco were not exactly known, their fates were probably similar to those of the fallen Ben and Stuckley Harding. Following the decision to appoint Colonel Zebulon Butler as a co-commander of the militia, the decision was made to hike 2 companies out to retrieve the Hardings. With stretchers in tow, we set out to bring our brethren home. We would bury them in a small plot just south of the Jenkins Ford. As a neighbor, the thoughts of these men were heavy on my heart. Good men cut down during their daily business. As a commander, the real question was how many of the enemy are there? It was terrible to imagine that we could lose 2 of us. It was incomprehensible to imagine we could lose 1,000 of us. The fact is, if the enemy knew our vulnerability, that so many of our men were with General Washington's army, and we would be vastly outnumbered. The general consensus was that General Washington, at best, might be able to spare a few companies, but their return to the valley might take a few weeks. So as we marched on the west bank of the river, tension among the men was palpable. We did not know the size nor the scope of our enemy, and we all wanted to take care of this solemn task in short order so we might quickly return and ready the defenses of our homes and families. The good Lord must have been with us that day, for as we marched north, our enemy, which we were totally unaware of, was moving overland south to Elijah Scoville's mountain. Had they been moving directly south with the river and met us head on, we would have been crushed. It was shortly around 3 in the afternoon when our journey began. We reached an area just west of the Hardings Field around 4:30 in the afternoon. Myself and Zeb Butler advised Lieutenant Colonel Dorrance to move about half a dozen of his men toward the rocky area where the bodies lay. As the small group moved toward the mutilated remains of the Hardings, 2 Indians emerged from nearby brush. The first Indian was shot and killed a few paces from whence he emerged from the brush. Seeing a larger force, the other Indian took flight towards the river. Several gave chase as to the fleeing Indian, who jumped headlong into the river. The pursuing men waited until he came up for air. At that point, he was summarily shot through the head before the current took his lifeless body downstream. Much to my dismay, a number of our men, seeing the horrific condition of the Harding bodies, responded in kind to the body of the lifeless Indian. While it was not more than a few minutes from the point I had dismounted my horse, I moved within about 20 yards of the bodies. I ordered the mutilation of the Indian's body to stop. The Indian's body had been beaten beyond recognition. His remains were so badly disfigured to such an extent, I care not to share it, expound upon it further. While I understood their anger, I reminded them that they were not heathen savages and that their behavior should reflect as such. Still, the message was sent to the enemy that we were not going to tolerate the ambush and the merciless killing of our people. Years later, it would come to bear that the Indian whose body that was left ravaged on the river rocks may have been the son of a woman known as Queen Esther of Montour. So we quickly attached the remains to our stretchers and moved out expeditiously. Our thoughts were both with those who had fallen, those who were captured, and our families who depend upon our protection. It was probably about 6:30 when we reached the small parcel of land just south of John Jenkins' home. And that place would be the place where the remains of the brothers Ben and Stuckley Harding. We then hallowed the ground by committing their remains to the earth. My friends, I fear the war with the British has arrived at our doorstep. We have carved our homes out of this wilderness. And we will defend against the British swine.
Thank you, Colonel Dennison. As you can tell, there's no love lost between our patriots here and our loyalists, many of whom lived a few yards from one another. But we saved probably the most infamous for last. And while we're all 100% behind Colonel Dennison, most of us, I would think, we're gonna turn the mic over very shortly to another Butler. I mentioned Zebulon Butler. The Loyalists had a man by the name of John Butler, also known as British Butler and Indian Butler. And I will say, our guys would get rolled in the Battle of Wyoming, as many of you know, but I have to hand it to the military brilliance of the British Butler. He knew what he was doing. He planned the expedition with great care, and he utilized the Native Americans to a point where he definitely was the class of the field in 1778 as far as military prowess is concerned. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colonel John Butler, the British Butler.
Greetings, loyal subjects of the Crown. My name is Major John Butler, Commander of His Majesty's Loyalist Rangers in North America. I am actually from the New York colony. By 1778, I am tasked with ending any sympathy that our colonial brethren have for the so-called rebellion. The Crown has instructed me to move my forces south from Fort Niagara to meet up with a large Indian force. The plan was with a force of approximately 900 Rangers and between 600 to 800 Indians, we would crush the rebellion where it lives. The key is surprise and overwhelming force. The enemy should think that they cannot oppose us. If the thought of our forces lying waste their homes and their settlements will not bring them to their senses, and they should oppose us, then we will crush them under our boots like we would a rabid animal, claiming for His Majesty's rights in this region that all shall come under the Crown. My thought was to move toward as far south as maybe Stroudsburg or Sunbury. The fact is, the further south we go, the greater propensity for rebellion. In fact, isolated settlements like Wyoming have been rather loyal to the cause of the rebellion. Still, even in these areas, there are those who have not forgotten the obligations to the king and country, and we shall see to their security in any and every way. On or about May 21st, 1778, my forces at Tioga Point, I meet with Seneca Chiefs Lucian and Conchawato. The plan is quite simple. We would move south on foot, and then with roughly 400 warriors, and then we would go by the Susquehanna River. Myself and Conchawago, we would oversee the constructions of flatboats and canoes, which would carry us south by way of the river, where we would make landing somewhere north of Wyoming. It would be at this point that both of our forces would converge on the rebels in Wyoming and eventually the enemy strongholds south of Wyoming. The element of surprise is the key of our strategy. On June 28, 1778, my force of about 300 Indians and 500 Rangers set out of our encampment on the banks of the west of the On the morning of June 30, 1778, we observed about 400 of Gucci's warriors moving in from the west. They had successfully conducted raids and attacks on the settlements of Coppersville. From here, our entire force of about 1,200 men, all clad in Indian war paint, swiftly canoed downstream before pulling our boats off at the mouth of the Bowman's Creek. It was shortly after 4 in the afternoon when I dispatched a party of scouts to move south in an effort to spot any signs of the enemy and report back at dusk, as our entire force would be moving in their general direction to establish the temporary encampment. My scouts intercepted several enemy working in the cornfields close to the river. 2 were killed. Those captured were brought before me. Following my interrogation, it was clear to me that the opportunity to seize the valley is now, rather than later. The next morning, I would move my forces upstream from the creek where we are currently and to an overland to a position that we will have a commanding view of the Wyoming Valley. I should have sufficient opportunity to assess the vulnerabilities of the Wyoming settlement. Following my reconnaissance of the terrain, I shall develop a plan of how to sack the entire region. Prior to any attack, I shall arrange a meeting with one of the key loyalists in the Wyoming Valley, Comet Wintermuth. His home and adjoining land may prove quite useful in our effort to dismantle the remaining enemy in Wyoming. Once in the valley, we must stay hidden and only show a small sliver of our force. If the enemy sees at our full force, they will most likely fall behind defensive positions and fight it out, which will be costly to both me, my manpower, and supplies. However, with the forces I have at my disposal, I am confident I can crush any opposition from the enemy and reclaim the valley for the crown. God save the king.
I don't know how you feel, but I think what we just witnessed here was phenomenal. At this point, I would like to have all of you give these folks a round of applause. What I'm going to do, and I'll ask you to hold your applause. We're going to go back into the 2025 and back into the 21st century. And I'm going to announce who these folks are. And if you don't mind standing, as I mention your names, John Jenkins was played by Rich Jenkins, descendant. Young Johnny Hatzel, played by Lucas Scavone. Bethia Jenkins, who was played by Nadine Dreyer.
Hey, come here.
Go ahead. Colonel Nathan Dennison was played by Dr. Thomas Alaviani. And of course, last but not least, our dreaded British Colonel John Butler was played by Greg Boyer. Don't beat up on Greg, because he's also part of the 24th Militia, so he is one of us too. At this point, I just want to take some time to thank a bunch of people. I'd like to start out with our First to Fall committee. As chair, I've been blessed to have the support of some really good people. Our president, Mary Portelli. Way in the back, Tom Oberzit. Manning the camera, Bill Rowe. Back at the table, Judy Aida. Not with us today, Cheryl Butera. And also John Kearns, who basically, along with several others, did a ton of work on the cemetery. I think it looks great, and really thrilled. I'd also like to recognize our board at large. Drew Smith. Ellen Quinn. Judy Stevenson. Bonnie Baird. Jackie Brazina. Chip Bell. And Sherry Emershaw. And I do want to take a moment here. Sherry is on our board, but she's also actively involved with the 24th. And we couldn't have pulled this off without Sherry's, mediation between the reenactors and our board. So thank you very much, Sherry. She does a fantastic job. She's all about living history, and we simply don't have enough of that. So I also want to just acknowledge the 24th Militia at large. They're encamped back there. Many of you have been able to see it. They do a fantastic job. I also just want to note that the cemetery behind us is maintained by the West Pittston Historical Society through a generous endowment from John Jenkins, Esquire. Basically, I'd like to also acknowledge some of our great sponsors. Big Top Rentals, Mark and Sue and family have done a great job in helping us. Rock Street Music, we have the sound system. Sue Hand, just a fantastic artist. Thank you, Sue, not just for this work, but the many that you've given, just in the furtherance of history. The Melberger family, for the lot that we were on here. Also, would like to acknowledge the First Lieutenant Jeffrey DePrimo, American Legion, Post 542. Also, Dion Fernandez of the Howell Lucy Funeral Home. I'd also like to thank Coach of the Wyoming Area Warriors, Randy Spencer, and he lent us some of his athletes to help us with the setup yesterday. Thank you, Coach Spencer and the Warriors. And also Ellen Quinn, who is not only a board member but a councilwoman in West Pittston. At this point, we're gonna be quick to bring this to the next phase. But I would like to say that when we established this, we want it to be kind of like the first step. There's other events that celebrate the heroics of much like we've heard, and I want to make sure that you're aware of when they are, where they are. I think going back since 1878, the Wyoming Monument Commemoration will have its annual commemoration ceremony on July 4th. I believe it's at 10 o'clock, right in front of the monument. It's a great event. I know they're going to have a great speaker this year. And of course, they spend a lot of time honoring the fallen with wreaths. It's definitely beautiful to watch. Also, I think after the commemoration, there will be the capitulation ceremony. They're going to reenact that at Denison, and I believe they're going to actually use the actual table that was used to do the capitulation. So that's something that's pretty cool. So that being said, this brings us to the portion of our program where we're going to now turn our attention to the cemetery. Our first to fall, Benjamin and Stuckley Harding, clearly they're the reasons we're here. So we're going to honor them in a ceremony that will be put on by the 24th Militia. So at this point, thank you for coming out. We'll be back next year. Thank you.
Halt. Left. Space. Decal. Horn. Arms. O Lord of hosts, stretch forth eternity, thine almighty arm to strengthen and protect the soldiers of our country. Support them in the day of battle, and in the time of peace keep them safe from all evil. Endue them with courage and loyalty, and grant that in all things they may serve without reproach. Amen. Now I'm gonna go to the- Oh, to Almighty God, we commend the souls of our brothers departed, and we commit their bodies to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection unto eternal life through our Lord Jesus Christ, at whose coming in glorious majesty to judge the world. The earth and the sea shall give up their dead, and the corruptible bodies of those who sleep in him shall be changed, and made like unto his own glorious body, according to the mighty working whereby he is able to subdue all things unto himself. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Climbing road. Shoulder when you're done. Make ready. Take game. Fire. Coming low. Shoulder. When you're done. Make ready. Take game. Fire. Come to the shoulder. Left. Face. Forward. March.